All right, friends, today we are in the first half of 1 Corinthians chapter 14, and I need to go ahead and shoot straight with you from the very beginning. I know very little about the first half of 1 Corinthians chapter 14. It is about two things that I did not grow up knowing much about, two things that, frankly, even though I've been trying to walk with Jesus for the last 20 years, I still don't know a whole lot about. If you were to take any chapter of the New Testament, the odds are that I would know more about any other chapter in the New Testament than I do about 1 Corinthians 14. So why I got assigned this one, I'm not quite sure. But here we are. And in most cases, I would have spent a whole lot of time kind of researching this and would have been ready to at least have some things to share with you. But it's the first time that I've done this in over 2 years. I am just kind of asking for a mulligan here. There's just not a lot that I know about this, and I have not had the time this week to really dig into it the way that I wish that I had. So, asking for a little bit of grace here, but there is one thing that I can observe here that I think will be somewhat helpful. So, what 1 Corinthians 14, the first half of it is talking about is prophecy and tongues. Speaking of tongues, speaking of prophecy. Now, there are multiple kinds of prophecy. Like if you look at the Old Testament prophecy, typically the Old Testament prophecy is people observing kind of the realities of the world, and on behalf of God who is speaking to them, then sharing what will happen if people do or do not turn towards God. Here, I get that kind of prophecy. This is a different kind of prophecy. It's a kind of prophecy where it seems like Paul recognizes that people hear things from God and are able to speak them directly to individuals. And you look in verse 3, this kind of prophecy is for the upbuilding and encouragement and consolation of other people. And then there's tongues. One kind of tongues is also found in the New Testament. It's found in Acts 2, where the apostles are given the ability to speak in a bunch of different languages so that they can proclaim the gospel to people in their native language. This is something different. This is people seeming to speak in like angelic tongues, in languages that nobody else understands. Here in verse 2, speaks in tongues not of men, but to God. No one understands them, but they utter mysteries in the Spirit. And that kind of prophecy and that kind of tongues is just something I don't have a ton of experience in. So I bet you'll read chapter 14, read it slowly and see what God might be speaking to you. And there are other places that you can kind of do some research and kind of learn a little bit about what's going on here. But the one observation that I would make here is that when you're talking about this kind of tongues and this kind of prophecy, Paul compares and contrasts them and says that one is better than the other. Is it better to have the gift of being able to speak directly to God in this kind of angelic language? Or, not that we can't speak directly to God in our own languages also, I'm not implying that, but saying, is it better to be able to speak in these like angelic languages? Or is it better to be able to speak prophetic words over other people? And he says, let me be really, really clear here. It is better to have the gift of prophecy. Why? And this points to a major theme all throughout 1 Corinthians. Because when you speak words of prophecy, it builds up the church as a whole. And it is better to have gifts that build other people up and build the church than to have gifts that just kind of like build yourself up. So what is it that he says here? He says in verse 4, the one who speaks in a tongue builds up himself. Now, there's nothing wrong with building up yourself. Now, there's something wrong with being puffed up, as we've talked about earlier. There's nothing wrong with building yourself up. But the one who prophesies builds up the church. And which one is better? So here's kind of a major theme here. And that is that the gifts that we are given are not just for our own benefit, but they're for the benefit of others around us. So if there's anything practical that I know that we can take from this, and I'm sure there is so much more that I just don't know that we can take from this, it's this. Let's be people who look at verse 3. Let's be people who speak to other people for their upbuilding, their encouragement, and their consolation. What Paul seems to recognize is that we can be given words from God to speak to other people for their upbuilding, their encouragement, and their consolation. How exactly that works in the way that Paul's talking about it, I don't really know. I mean, there are certainly times when I'm talking with someone when it seems like I'm given words that didn't come from myself, that God is asking me to speak to them. Maybe that's what's happening here. You've probably had that where you've been at coffee with somebody and you haven't known how you're going to respond, and then when it was time for you to respond, you just felt like you kind of had the words. Maybe that's what's going on here. But I think maybe practically what we lean into here is, how can we be men and women who are upbuilding, encouraging, and consoling others? Is there somebody in your life who needs one of those things? Who needs to be built up? Who needs to be encouraged? Who needs to be consoled? And maybe what you do is you recognize who that person is. And then you pray to God, God, just give me a word to be able to speak to them. Just give me a word from you that I can speak to them. So this is helpful. Again, not an exhaustive look at chapter 14 because I don't know a whole lot about chapter 14. But that's what I'm taking away from it today. So there are some people in my life that need a word from God that maybe God's going to give to me for them. And I'm going to just pray that God will give me those words. And maybe that's something that will be helpful to you today also. Keep with your reading. We got just this week left, and I'll see you again soon.